In all the examples so far, I've used the execute query method, which returns a result set instance. In this video, I'll switch to using the execute method, first to execute the same select query we used in the previous video, and then to execute additional CRUD statements. I've got the Query Music project open. For this code, I'll create a new class in the dev.lpa package with the main method, and I'll call this MusicDML. As promised, I'll first demonstrate how you get a connection if you're using a JDBC driver that's earlier than JDBC 4.0. Prior to that version, a driver had to be loaded explicitly. To load a class explicitly or manually, you have to call class.forename and pass the fully qualified class name as a string. This method will actually return a class instance and can be used for other purposes like reflection. You remember, we can call getClass on any object to get a class instance. In this case, we're getting a class instance based on a fully qualified class name in a string literal for a class we haven't included in any of our import statements. This won't compile without a try catch, so I'll use IntelliJ to generate that code. The class.forename method was necessary in older JDBC versions and allowed the database driver to be registered dynamically. This gave programmers the flexibility to swap in different drivers at runtime or in different environments. This mechanism has since been replaced with something called the Service Provider Interface. I'll talk about service providers and this interface later in the course. Even though it's no longer necessary to use this class.forename call, let's just see what happens if we do. Legacy code or older applications may still use this approach, and you should at least recognize it. Once the driver was registered, the process was the same to get a connection. I'll set up a try with resources, and in that, I'll set up a new connection using Driver Manager this time. I'll pass my connection string for the MySQL database. I'll pass the username stored in an environment variable this time. I'll do the same for the password. I'll be setting these up in the run configuration in a minute. I'll also set up a statement in my try with resources. And as always, I'll deal with the SQL exception. Within the try clause, I'll be querying the artist table, so I'll start with a variable for an artist's name. I'll set that to ELF. My query variable will be set to a select statement, so select star from artists where artist name equals single quote %s single quote. Notice here that I'm using artists without specifying the music schema. I had mentioned previously that we don't have to use the schema name if we have the database name in the connection, so I'll show you this in this example. This string will be formatted using the artist variable. I'll now call the execute method on the statement instead of execute query. This method returns a boolean. So I'll print that result. The execute method can be used for different kinds of statements like insert, update and delete in addition to the select statement, and I'll cover all of these shortly. Before I run this, I'll again set up some environment variables on the run configuration for this class. Because I've only created MusicDML in this video and not yet run it, there is no configuration set. So I'll create a new one by coming over here to the plus button to add a new one and selecting application. I'll call this configuration MusicDML. I need to select the right class name, which is the code we have been working on in this video. This time I'll set up both the username and password here. I'll click OK to save the configuration. Now I'll run this code. Notice first that I get a message that loading the class the way I was in this code has been deprecated. It then tells me what the new driver class is and that it's automatically registered, etc. Lastly, I get that the result is true. Okay, so now I'll remove the code that uses class.forName and its surrounding try block as well. Next, I'm going to change my artist name from Elf to Neil Young. I happen to know that Neil Young is not in the artists table. I'll run the code again. This time, I don't get any message about deprecated code. I'm also still getting a result that's true, even though I know for a certainty that Neil Young isn't in the artists database. This method, execute, always returns true when it's used with a select statement. This means this Boolean result can't be used to test for the existence of a record in a table. Instead, I'll test the data in the result set. I'll use the getResultSet method on statement to get that data. I'll set up a Boolean variable, which I'll call found, which will be true if the result set's not null and the next method returns true. I'll use this variable to print whether the artist was found or not found. Running this code again, I still get result is true, but now I get artist was not found. In general, you use execute query for select statements, but there may be some isolated use cases where using execute makes more sense. Before I continue, I'm going to set up a few public static methods on this class. The first will print records given a result set. I'll make it private and static and it'll return a Boolean. This will take a result set as a parameter and throw an SQL exception, and I'll call it print records. It will return true if records were found. I'll initialize a Boolean variable found data to false. I'll return this value from this method. I'll open up the main class from the previous video, and what I want to do is copy the code that prints the result set in tabular form. I'll copy the code starting at the line where I declare the meta variable and copy all the statements through to the end of the while loop code. I'll paste it in my new private method on the MusicDML class. Finally, I just want to set the variable found data to true in the while loop. I'll put this at the end of the while loop. So this method will print records found returning true, or else just return false if no records were found. The next method I'll create is an execute select method, also private and static, and returning a Boolean. I'll make this generic so that it can be used to select data from any record using a single column name and value. This method has 4 parameters: the statement object, a table name, a column name, and a column value. It'll throw an SQL exception, so I don't have to handle it in the method. I'll create the select statement using the data passed. In this case, I'll go back to calling statement.executeQuery and getting a result set back from that. If I get a result set back, I'll execute the printRecords method and return its Boolean value. Otherwise, I'll return false from this method. What's significant about this method is it's not creating the connection to the database or an additional statement. Instead, an existing statement is passed to it. Creating connections and statements can be expensive operations. It's good practice to close connections as soon as you're done using them. It's true. But on the other hand, it's also a good idea to keep them open if you know you're going to be executing a series of related statements. So this method will be used with an existing open statement. Getting back to the main method on this class, I'm going to remove the code I've got that queries the artist's table. So I'll remove everything in the try block. Next, I'll set up a couple of variables: table name, and column value. I'll set up the table name. This time I'll go back to including the schema name as part of the table name. My column name is artist name. The column value is the value of the artist name, so I'll use ELF again here. I'll call execute select, passing the statement, table, and column data. I'll wrap this in an if statement so that if nothing is found for this artist, I'll print that maybe we should add this record. I'll run this. And here, because I'm using ELF, I'll get ELF's information printed in tabular form. I'll again change ELF to Neil Young. I'll rerun this. This code still prints the column names, which means the results set got returned with metadata, but not results. And I also see the text, maybe we should add this record. So let's do that. I'll create another private static method, this time to insert data into a table. This will be similar to the select record method, but I'll call it insert record, and instead of a single column name and single column value, I'll pass arrays there. This method will also throw an SQL exception. I'll join the column names into a comma delimited string. I'll do the same with column values, but I want them to be enclosed in single quotes. I'll construct the insert DML query with these values using the formatted method. I'll print the generated insert statement so you can see it. I'll call execute on the statement, passing it my generated insert query and getting the Boolean result back. I'll print the result and return that result. Okay, so now I'll add a call to this in the code in the main method. I'll pass the statement and table name, and I'll pass string arrays using a single value in each array, the same values as before. Let's run this and see what happens. You can see the insert DML statement that was created printed out. Then insert result equals false is printed. Does this mean this statement failed? No, actually it doesn't. First, if our SQL statement really fails, meaning if it gets an error, I would have gotten an exception and the application would have ended there. Are you wondering if this statement didn't work because we didn't include artist ID? Actually, for any of the tables in this database, the IDs are automatically generated for us when a new record is inserted because of how this schema was set up. This means we don't have to include artist ID in the insert statement as one of the values that needs to get inserted. If you have MySQL Workbench open, you can try running a select query to confirm Neil Young was really added. So why did we get false back? As it turns out, we'll only get true back if we're running a select query, so again, you can't use this Boolean value to confirm whether the record was added. I'll remove that code from the insert record method. Instead, I'll check the getUpdate count on the statement. I'll pass that value to a records inserted variable. If that's greater than 0, then that means a record was inserted in this case. For good measure, I'll call execute select, passing the first column name and value to select the data. I'll return true if the number of records inserted is greater than 0. I'll run my code again. This prints out that Neil Young was added with the generated artist ID that my SQL automatically generated. This didn't execute an insert because we inserted this in the previous run. So I'll change the artist name again, this time to Bob Dylan. I'll rerun this code. Now I can see the insert statement that was executed and I get confirmation that Bob Dylan was added. In this video, I used the same statement instance to execute 3 DML statements consecutively, and I successfully added new data to the music database. In the next video, I'll cover deleting and updating data, and then we'll look at inserting multiple rows of data.